Over the last century, the discoveries in physics and cosmology have undermined our confidence in the reality of everyday life and pushed us into the realm of science fantasy. What with malleable space-time bending and expanding like a four-dimensional soap bubble, individual particles being neither here nor there, but everywhere and yet nowhere, and finally a cataclysmic beginning during which everything sprang from nothingness. The universe seems more like the product of someone's hyperactive imagination. We are left with this wide gulf between what we experience and what is going on behind the scenes. It has left many in the scientific community as well as the general public scratching their heads, wondering what the heck is going on? Why won't reality play nice? Why won't it play according to the rules? Why is it giving me such a headache? If you ask me, reality is in need of a timeout. In response, fundamental physics has started to cross over into the dark side, to delve more and more into philosophy in an attempt to make sense of all the fantastical scientific phenomenon. More and more, physicists have been trying to weave all of the disjunct pieces into a single, unified, understandable fabric of reality. All this, despite reason's insistence that there is no sense to be had in scientific reality. We have a primal need to make sense of the nonsensical, and to tackle what we don't understand. We don't react well to limits, which is to our credit. Along those lines, all sorts of intriguing and mind-blowing possibilities have been put forth to explain the unexplainable. For example, multiverses birthing like an ever-expanding Mandelbrot set, or reality being one big video simulation that we all happen to share. I tend to be more conservative in nature, so I like to keep one foot firmly on reality's shore and to gingerly test the waters of possibility. I just hope that no one sneaks up behind me and pushes me in before I'm ready. So here is my toe test proposal to match my nature. We will explore an approach that is conservative and yet should take us into unexplored territory. I will make the following arguments. 1. Full-blown reality has yet to outlive its usefulness in physics. 2. We can still construct a model based on physically interacting objects to explain all current phenomenon. And 3. Said model will redefine our reality. The living portion of Irwin's cat will be pleased to hear this. That third point, the redefinition of reality, gets me a little queasy and uncomfortable. However, it is a part of progress. There is no progress without change, no matter how rooted in the path we want to stay. All we can do is sit back, hold tight, and go along for the ride. So, without further ado, well, you get the picture. The first 3 picture essays in the series will define what I mean by good old reality, which I will refer to as reality with a lowercase r, or little r reality. In a pinch, I will call it little r. Little r is little because it is not the philosopher's reality, which sits there doing nothing, undergoing no change, causing nothing, and just is, like a big fat Java slug, consuming time. I will call the philosopher's reality big R reality, or just big R for short. Big R has several impressive names, for example, reality in itself, absolute reality, ultimate reality, or metaphysical reality. It is where big T truth resides. In contrast, little r reality is a working person's reality, the reality we use in everyday life. It has unassuming names like perceptive reality or experience. It is the basis for little t truths. As a starting point, the first 3 videos in this series will focus on the principles that define little r reality. There will be 1 video per principle. In addition, the first 3 videos will introduce topics that will be covered in later videos. For example, we will explore in a future video how little r reality and big R reality interact and how both are necessary. In other words, one should not be favored over the other. In reality, nothing goes to waste. So let us begin with little r reality. Simply put, little r is a reality based on 3 straightforward principles. The 3 basic principles are: an object exists, an event happens, and an effect has causes. Simple principles, simple reality. Disciplining doesn't have to be complicated. But don't turn your back on this little bugger. It has been known to misbehave when no one is looking. This view of reality is so simple, in fact, that it does not even come close to the reality that we humans live and breathe, with its passion, its people, and its chocolate, just to name a few add-ons. Still, those three principles form the very core of our reality. Even though it would be great fun to go explore the entirety of the human condition, I have to keep on track. Otherwise, I will not get to where I want to go, a reality that behaves, a reality that follows the rules. So my apologies if the examples of how we use those three principles seem a little basic and dry. You might want to crank up the humidifier for this video and the two following it. Let us explore the first principle. An object exists. It seems almost a tautology to say that an object exists, and tautologies are useless in everyday life. In fact, all three principles border on tautologies. However, it is not so much the principles themselves that are important, but how they interplay. Let me illustrate how the first principle, an object exists, interplays nicely with one of the other principles. Once, while I was in my backyard, I heard a rustling in the distant bushes. Even though I dislike horror films because the victim never heeds the voice in his head to run, I did not heed the voice in my own head. I walked right toward the sound, my curiosity getting the better of me. The voice inside my head was screaming, "Don't go into the woods! Don't go into the woods!" But I just didn't listen. Overhead, there were a number of noisy crows walking up and down the branches of the trees, pecking aggressively at the limbs. Another movie came to mind. My heart started to beat a little faster. As I got closer to the rustling, still hidden from view, several crows got into attack mode. They dive-bombed me, never getting close enough to inflict damage, but close enough for me to flinch. My imagination started to get the best of me. I had no idea what was waiting for me in the nearby bush. Maybe it was some uber crow that the other crows considered their deity, and that I was not fit to be in the presence of. Maybe it had raptor claws that could disembowel unsuspecting prey. Maybe it was stalking me rather than me stalking it. Still, I kept going. I finally came upon the place where the beast most surely lay, still hidden from view. It did not seem to be afraid of me, because it did not run away. It either did not know better, or did not need to be afraid. I gathered my nerve and stepped closer, ignoring the wolf next to one of the trees. Then the beast came into view. By the way, I had the perfect picture to match the story, but copyright law would have prevented me from using it. And I am too lazy and cheap to buy the permission. So there is not a wolf next to one of the trees in the previous picture. Just Google wolf camouflaged in forest to see the image. It is the fourth image found, or better yet, you can use your imagination to see the wolf hidden in the background. Continuing on with the story. And there it was, a fledgling. When it saw me, it clumsily flew right at me and landed at my feet. I screamed like a little girl. Not that a screaming little girl is funny, just when a grown man does it. So, my fear was unfounded. Crows, like humans, are intelligent, and don't have an instinctive fear of humans. They must learn it from other crows. Perhaps I was the tool the adult crows needed to teach this fledgling to fear me. And for the record, let me state that I'm not normally a tool, although my wife might disagree. Despite my self-embarrassment, I relearned an important lesson that most kids pick up before their first birthday. If something happens, there is almost certainly an object behind the scenes creating all the ruckus. I bet you didn't know that peekaboo had such deep philosophical ramifications. At this point, I'm not going to get into related philosophical questions like what the essence of an object is, whether an object really and truly exists, how do we know an object exists, and what do we mean when we say an object exists. All these questions can be highly entertaining, and most thoughtful humans who have taken a philosophy course have some sort of opinion on them, or maybe not. However, being a mere mortal, my goal is not absolute truth or big T truth. I'm going to have to settle for mediocre verisimilitudes, or little t truths. In other words, the truth that experience teaches us, or at least confirms. So as the prior story highlights, the useful corollary to the simple principle that an object exists is also simple. An event has a corresponding object. We have our first relationship among the three principles. At some point, we will see that they all play together nicely. I'm going to take a quick detour here to show why this corollary is important and how its misuse has caused trouble. This approach will allow us to clear a path to a possible solution. At this point, it is a little premature, and I will expand on this subject later. However, I mention it here to show that the current exercise of laying a foundation is not mere prattle. even though my kids would probably roll their eyes and disagree. I had a funny picture of a red-headed Emma Stone rolling her eyes, but again, copyright would have prevented me from using it. So I used a picture that does not have rolling eyes, but shows a true redhead like my daughter. Not that Emma Stone is fake for dyeing her hair. By the way, be nice to redheads. They will soon become extinct. Here is the detour. I'm sitting in front of my laptop late at night, staring at the screen, trying to tease out an original idea from my brain. I see a flash of light in the corner of my eye. Unfortunately, it is not the brilliant idea I had hoped for, because a second later, a loud boom rattles my windows. Immediately I think of lightning, even though I did not actually see it. The object in this case is the lightning, and the events are the flash of light and the thunderclap. We could debate whether lightning is the true object, like the origami gathering dust on my shelf. Both sides would have good arguments, but that is not the point of the exercise. More important is what it shows about our makeup. We have a strong natural tendency to frame all experiences as an object that does something. Case in point, the lightning struck. Fortunately for me, it was not my house. It was some poor schmuck down the street. We extend this tendency to all sorts of things, which might or might not be technically correct. For example, justice reigns, love conquers, and rainbows shine. In most cases, we recognize that these are not independent objects when we give a name to them, that these things are just conventions, abstractions, or illusions. However, when it comes to big R reality, we just can't make up our minds. Many a century has been spent trying to figure out whether big R actually exists, what its true nature is, and how we can get a sum of that impossible dream. The common sense and natural tendency is to say that big R exists. This position is based on the most general and fundamental event of all, experience. If we accept that experience is an event and that an event has a corresponding object, then we are pushed to the conclusion that big R exists. I mean, what else could account for reality? Simple argument, simple conclusion. This initial position is one volley in a long-standing ping-pong match between philosophers. This started in our early history, and that continues even today. I doubt I could do it justice in the space of any number of videos, nor will I try. However, nature has finally joined the argument, and it is confronting us to make a final decision. This is where we will make a jump. It is a little premature, and consequently, it is all just speculation at this point. Sometimes it is helpful to see where one is headed before starting a journey. So here it is. We don't need to proclaim that big R reality truly exists in order to be a realist. Realism should not be the dirty word that mainstream physics makes it out to be. Saying one is a realist shouldn't imply that one believes in the existence of big R. As long as we have existing objects, that is as real as it needs to get. I would even go as far as to say that positing big R reality as an existing object is a contradiction, which can lead to all sorts of nasty fallacies. This is a topic which will be explored in a later video. Correspondingly, those who maintain that finding and understanding real things is a big waste of time because of the failure of big R reality are setting up a straw man, or if you prefer, a straw teddy bear. Pointing to our inability to perceive or understand big R reality shouldn't stop us from trying to understand what is behind, for example, quantum phenomena, no matter how absurd or unreal it may seem. Additionally, the failure of metaphysical big R does not translate to a failure of little r reality. Instead, it points to our failure to understand where physical phenomena are leading us. The failure is in our current set of objects we use to make sense of the world. The failure is in giving to the metaphysical premise that objects don't and cannot in theory exist in the quantum realm. Wait a minute, you may be saying to yourself, or not, if you already stopped believing in the existence of big R along with Santa Claus a long time ago. If there is no big R reality, then how come we all see, smell, hear, taste, and feel the same thing? How come when I close my eyes and reopen them, my hoagie is still sitting there? Unless my dog snuck up and stole it. That, detective, is the right question. Rather than assume that big R reality exists and somehow, some way explains everything there is to know about our little r reality, we are at a turning point in history where we need to dig deeper. In the same vein, we shouldn't be satisfied with abstractions like fields, forces, energy, space-time, wave functions, singularities, and wave particles, because we believe that reality can only be represented with mathematical objects. Rather, we need to find new, real, and more fundamental objects no matter how difficult it is or how many assumptions we need to implode. What we need to do is find the fledgling in the forest. Enough of that. Time to get off my soapbox, at least for now, until the hankering overcomes me again or my allergies act up and make me grumpy. So what's up for grabs? In particular, we will explore two somewhat hidden assumptions that will have to be demoted: the atomic principle and the unity of an object. But not to worry, when I say demoted, I don't mean that they will become invalid. Rather, they will lose their universality. In other words, they will become conditional, like all good little T-truths should be. Like an angel who has fallen, or a God who has been made mortal, which actually is a good thing. Failure often leads to deeper understanding. Besides, absolutes are just a stopgap. Show me an absolute big T truth, and I will show you a truth that points to our ignorance. Yes, it seems contradictory to say that, but there are a number of statements like that which we have accepted as meta-truth. Another example of an unquestioned truth is the assumption that the more precise we become, the more real things become. Along those lines is the proposal that the macro world, such as my cat, who is pestering me to feed her at the moment, is an illusion, and that the atoms that compose her are more real somehow. The progression can go on, but I get ahead of myself. I will have to tackle that at a later time. Steering back onto course, the two principles, the atomic principle and the unity of an object, will be explored in depth in a later video, but we will make a quick stop at each to at least explain what they are about. I need to buy some lottery tickets anyways. In short, when I speak of the atomic principle, I am not referring exclusively to the modern-day version of atoms. Instead, I am referring to the several thousand-year-old idea that matter is always composed of parts. It is everyday notion that has been successfully extended to the microscopic. Everyday in the sense that all objects we encounter have parts. For example, if I drop my coffee mug, it will shatter into many pieces. Same with liquids. I can pour milk into my coffee mug from a gallon jug. We could also include gases, but that wouldn't add anything to the current discussion. And matter can change from one form into another. I can melt my coffee mug into a molten puddle, or I can freeze my milk if I absent-mindedly put it into the freezer, which I have done. Please don't tell anybody. Based on experience, it would be extraordinary to say that there is an indivisible object. If we look at where the atomic principle has taken us in the last several centuries, it is mind-boggling. We started with the first level of the invisible, cells and microscopic organisms. From there it was on to their building blocks, molecules, and then we dove into atoms. From there we burrowed into the subatomic and finally into quarks and their brethren. Will there be anything smaller? Can there be anything smaller? Maybe, maybe not. Despite its success, the atomic principle has one big bugaboo. Once an object is identified, it automatically begs the question of what its composition is, of what its parts are. And calling something fundamental does not solve the issue. That would be a human-made limit, no matter how big T-truth the word fundamental sounds. Humankind is not the master of nature. I am guessing that nature sighs a lot over us humans and our presumptiveness. However, there is a simple, real exception to the atomic principle, and it is fairly common, although a lot less common in nature at the human level than the atomic principle. The exception to the atomic principle will be revealed in a later video. Sorry, but a magician does not give away his secrets. To reveal it now without the context of a full picture would be a tremendous letdown, like knowing the finale of Lost from day one. Kudos to you if you can figure out the exception to the atomic principle beforehand, or if you understood the finale of Lost. As to the other principle, the unity of an object, it is likewise commonplace. I alluded to it when my dog was stealing my hoagie. That example highlights many properties of objects, their independence, their objectivity, and their permanence. However, there is a subtler feature, and that is the existence of an object as a single thing. It crosses over into the metaphysical, and is built upon the others. To illustrate, let's briefly explore a model of consciousness and reality that most of us have adopted, consciously or unconsciously. I call it the eye-hole model, and it helps explain to ourselves how we see the same thing. In brief, if I were to appear through a hole in a circus tent, I would see a lot going on. In the circus ring, for example, there might be an acrobatic act to surprise and amaze. Around the main ring, there could be hundreds in the audience viewing the spectacle. each with their own consciousness and their own representation of reality. If we were to line up all the representations of the circus act together, each would be slightly different. For example, the sight and sound perspective would be different for each person. If some in the audience had color blindness, the colors would also differ. And to a child in the audience, the stage might seem larger than life. Despite these differences, we would say we are all seeing the same thing, the same acrobats, the same apparatus, and the same circus. We juxtapose all those varied representations to what the eye peering through the hole in the circus tent sees and hold up that single eye as supreme, as the true representation of the object as it really is. In other words, it is a thing that causes all of us to see the same thing. In addition, experience confirms our shared adventure. When we communicate, we discover that what we see, other people see, and what others taste, we can taste, at least not the same piece in most instances. Keep away from my lava cake. It has become so much a part of us that we intuitively know those things which others would see and those which they would not. For example, when I stare up at the sky, I know that the floaters I see, no one else can see, all because of that figurative eye peering through the hole in the circus tent, observing another person, observing the object. I don't know if we learn this or whether it is hardwired into our psyche, but it is there, this belief that a single unified object is the source of each of our representations. It has been ingrained into our culture and our art. It is the all-seeing eye, the eye of providence, that perceives things as they really are. Some would call it God's eye. Some would maintain that it is the eye the scientist uses. We could probably go on, but you get the point. Even though we all use and accept this principle, an alternative is available. However, the alternative to this principle, the unity of an object, is not so obvious. At least not as obvious as the alternative to the atomic principle will be. Interestingly enough, breaking an object into its components via the atomic principle does not destroy its unity, only its existence, if that makes any sense. In other words, unity is a property of reality itself, or big R reality, and not of the object. There is a single object because there is a single reality, or at least that is what most believe. I will save the exploration of these two alternatives for a later video. We have several more videos to go through before we get to a point where it'll all make sense, even to myself. And demoting metaphysical big R reality as an existing thing will be the first small step in the journey. There is one more point for this portion of the jigsaw puzzle, and then we can wrap up this video about the existence of objects. This point is probably the most difficult to get one's head around. It has to do with consciousness's place in any future view of reality. Here we go. Over the past few centuries, Western science has been trying to cast off consciousness from reality, or at least isolate its effect as much as possible. The goal has been to try and extend the eye-hole model, to make scientific truths completely objective. However, nature has thrown its monkey wrench into the works. Quantum mechanics has shown that the act of perception in particular, or of measurement in general, depending upon your interpretation of quantum theory, changes the outcome of an experiment. And to make matters worse, there is no easy way to predict exactly what the outcome will be. We can know the probabilities of each outcome, but the future appears to be inherently non-classical. God does play with dice. Funny, I wouldn't have pegged her as a gambler. We have struggled mightily over the last century, trying to integrate this fundamental oddity into reality. Things have gotten so unreal that few modern physicists are concerned with the question, what is real? Many have turned their back on reality, content to leave the meaning of quantum theory to a few eccentrics or philosophers. And who listens to philosophers nowadays anyways? So instead of reality, the focus has been for the most part on equations, symmetries, and big T truth. As justification for this view, some have maintained that our reality is so tied to consciousness that both little r and big R can be dismissed as too subjective. Some theorists have entirely shut their eyes to any form of reality. The only thing left is an illusory version of little r reality, which can be relegated to the exclusive domain of neuroscience. Consciousness and reality have been completely removed from physics, and all that remains is pure big T truth. Bravo! Mission accomplished. The only problem with this position is that it has stagnated physics for the most part over the last 50 years. We still don't have an answer, for example, as to why our universe is so fine-tuned that conscious life emerged. Of course, there is the anthropic principle, which extends the habitable planet model in our universe. In one version of this approach, there are many universes in a multiverse, just like there are many planets in our galaxy. We just happen to be in a universe that is agreeable to us. Even though this reality is possible, there is currently no easy way to touch it or test it. So this approach tends to contribute to the stagnation. Another example of a stagnating hypothetical approach is string theory. I pass no judgment on string theory, but it too has not produced any verifiable predictions in almost 50 years. Rather than admit defeat, some physicists have started to push a recalcitrant reality back into the limelight. Two good examples of this are the many interacting worlds model proposed by Howard Wiseman et al. And the universal time model proposed by Lee Smolin, who was shown. Here are 30-second encapsulations of each, translated into the terms defined in these videos. These terms might as well be used for something. In the first model, the many interacting worlds model, big R is replicated many times over, and all of the little r versions of a single object are linked together causally with a repulsive force. All objects behave classically given this new hidden agent, which accounts for quantum behavior. This model is a relative newcomer, so it was difficult to find a pertinent, free-to-use picture. The picture shown relates to the many worlds interpretation, which is not to be confused with the many interacting worlds model. They have similarities, but several important differences when it comes to reality. In both, there are many worlds, but for the many interacting worlds model, the worlds are pre-existing and do not branch off into additional realities. In the second model, the universal time model proposed by Lee Smolin, big R reemerges in a simplified form that is based on a single universal and real time. Even though time is real, and as a consequence big R, space is lost. Likewise, there is a single little r which keeps events and the causality between them as existing things. However, objects become illusions. In this scheme, causal events are the building blocks upon which all little r things are constructed. And since causal events make up everything, everything is related to something else, all framed in a single big R reality. Nothing stands alone. Both of these overviews are gross oversimplifications and probably misrepresentations, but for now they will have to do. Here is the rub. While these two models are definitely a step in the right direction, away from stagnation, they may reintroduce the difficulty of accounting for consciousness and its role in science. How that difficulty is reintroduced in each will be covered in a later video. If you ask me, we are on the final leg within a maze filled with locked doors, puzzles, and traps. We are so frustratingly close, we just have one final door to solve and unlock. The key to unlocking this door is consciousness, and the only way out that I can see is to explain consciousness once and for all. In order to do that, consciousness will have to be subsumed in a more encompassing physical model. In other words, consciousness will become real, and not just in the subjective way that we all experience. In effect, consciousness will become an actual object, an object which can be modeled and emulated from nature's handiwork. We will be able to create synthetic intelligence, to borrow John Hagelin's term, and not just artificial intelligence, which is a simulation of true consciousness. I just hope SI is not as clever, deceptive, or self-aware as Ava, Alicia Vikander's character in Ex Machina. But that is probably wishful thinking on my part. We may have to eventually address such issues as the rights of the newly conscious and intelligent. Synthesized life forms may be the first non-human intelligence that we have to incorporate into our society. Unless the SETI project stumbles upon something first. Just to be clear, this position does not mean that consciousness will become fundamental, as some would have it. Consciousness will become just another possible existing object in reality. More fundamental objects will make consciousness possible, and consciousness will be emergent. My apologies to any and all panpsychists who believe in a world soul as a fundamental object. I just cannot go in that direction and remain consistent with the three guidelines of little r reality. As a consequence of this view, part of the brain's function will be to act as a bridge between little r reality and consciousness. Instead of the brain somehow magically generating consciousness through circuitry, or somehow interacting with an ethereal entity outside of reality, consciousness will be just an advanced form of information processing that we have yet to understand the machinations of. Nature is rarely frivolous in its mindless genius. Whew, I think I made it through the basic outline on consciousness. Sorry for being so obtuse. That is a problem when taking on consciousness. It is hard to get a handle on it. There is nothing quite like it in all of the universe. Also, I have not laid the groundwork for proposing such an ultimate role for consciousness. That will be covered in a later video. Despite the brevity of the previous discussion, I hope it will become apparent that the end game for creating a new version of reality must also include a role for consciousness. The wall between reality and consciousness will have to come down. Anything less will be incomplete, no matter how our current brand of reality is sliced or diced. Synthesis and unification will be a big part of the next stage of reality, and it will not be limited to reality and consciousness. I would venture that the perceived hard barrier between science and philosophy will also come down. There will probably be other areas of unification, but I will leave that to future exploration. Granted, it is a tall order to account for all the quantum and relativity weirdness in the universe, and to also explain consciousness. However, I believe it can be done. If not by me, then by somebody else, which is definitely the most probable. Still, I will be putting a donut where my mouth is, and the donut stops here. Don't tell my cardiologist. I am also of the firm belief that whatever lays at the foundation of reality will be amazingly simple and straightforward, like a "I could have had 8 juiced vegetables" moment. I would even bet that a child could understand it. When it comes to understanding our world, we are all children. My wife probably wants me to grow up a little bit, but hey, where's the fun in that? I like to keep young at heart, even though I'm getting a little long in the tooth. False confidence aside, I can see why there are relatively few pursuing a new vision of reality. The odds of success are extremely low. Shark bit, lightning struck, and lottery winner all at the same time low. Once in a millennium low. And this is from a guy who thinks his port glass is always half full. In addition to the low probability of success, the skill set and temperament needed to succeed in the endeavor could be an odd combination of physics, philosophy, salesmanship, showmanship, and art with a smidgen of narcissism, a dash of Asperger's, and a scintilla of mysticism. I, on the other hand, am more of a behind-the-scenes kind of person, which will most likely hurt my proposal's chances. I doubt I could give a TED Talk in front of a group of critical thinkers. I had enough trouble narrating this video. Then there is a question of timing. The world has to be ready to embrace a radical new reality. A soothsayer can chant all she wants, but her truths may fall upon deaf ears. Until enough people listen and are persuaded, the words are just white noise at best, or sacrilege at worst. Fortunately, heretics like Giordano Bruno are no longer burned at the stake. Or worse. Still, professional shunning, which could be the modern-day equivalent of flaying, is a real-world possibility for most scientists. Despite the odds and the hurdles, the more the merrier, I like to say. It is like trying to find signs of extraterrestrial life in our galaxy using SETI at home. The more people involved in the search, the quicker the goal can be achieved, whether it be positive or negative. It will be for posterity to judge whether a particular approach, or even the premise itself, was a monumental waste of time. That is one of the reasons there will be very little negative criticism of other reality models in any of these videos. We may find that bits and pieces from one model may be combined with pieces from another to come up with a final solution. Physics should encourage many new and different avenues of exploration. Who knows? A hidden gem may be found. Also, any model should stand on its own, instead of the carcasses of its competitors. The golden rule, and not the rule of gold, will apply. And like the search for life, many of the fundamental ideas in physics do not require years of specialized training. They are accessible to even the most non-scientific among us. I would venture that the next model of reality will be so out of the box and so basic that many years of training in physics might be more of a hindrance than a help. We will have to learn to see old things through new glasses. I doubt most would agree with that position, and rightly so, given the success of physics over the last several centuries. However, some of the best ideas in science and physics have come from outside the mainstream. Two good examples of this are Galileo, who got us started on scientific inquiry and formalization, and Albert Einstein, who creaked open the door to a new and non-classical reality. Of course, that does not mean that physics knowledge and training will become irrelevant or trivial. Quite the opposite. Formalizing, filling in, testing, refining, and extending a new model of reality, whatever that may be, will require all the expertise and genius current and future physicists can muster. If anything, a new physical model would guarantee employment and funding of physicists for the current century and beyond. I would hate to see physics funding left in the dust. I would hope it enjoys the same funding opportunities that space exploration has seen in recent days from the private sector. All the more important with the reduction in investment from the federal government on basic research. To compete, physics will have to be bold. As for me personally, my main hope in all of this is that faster than light travel will be perfected before I buy the daisy farm. One basic principle down and two to go. After the three principles of little r reality and the features of big R reality have been explored, and then the relationship between little r and big R have been fleshed out, we will get into one possible set of physical objects that could meet this challenge to imagination. However, until then, it is baby steps. It is more for my comfort level than yours. Remember, change makes me queasy. It is time to summarize. Even though a lot has been covered, here are the three main points you should glean from the first picture essay. They can be taken with you in your pocket. Into the dark side cave. 1. A new set of objects is required to make progress in physics. 2. The new set of objects will allow physicists to consolidate relativity, quantum mechanics, and consciousness. And 3. The new sets of objects will be the starting point for our new vision of reality. Onward and upward.